What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast about the movie The Wild Robot. Here's a quick synopsis. Rosum Unit 7134, aka Roz, a robot designed to complete tasks, wakes up on an island and starts to connect with the animals on it, specifically Brightbill, a goose who she treats as her own child, and Fink, a lonely fox. The film stars Lupita Nyong'o, Pedro Pascal, Kit Connor, Catherine O'Hara, Bill Nighy, Stephanie Hsu, Mark Hamill, and Ving Rhames. Standout performances. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but this isn't the first time Lupita Nyong'o has lent her voice in movies. She's the voice of Maz in the Star Wars sequel trilogy and Rashaka in the live-action Jungle Book. So it makes all the sense in the world that she would lend her voice to a proper animated film, and boy did she pick the perfect one as the voice of Roz. She brings real emotion to the role, and when it comes to standout performances in animated films, it's usually the funny ones that stands out, and she is funny in the movie, but it just felt different. It felt like a signature Nyong'o performance. I haven't felt this way about a vocal performance since Rooney Mara in Kubo and the Two Strings. No performer has had a better 2024 than Nyong'o, who has given two brilliant performances in The Wild Robot and A Quiet Place Day One. And what's interesting about Lupita is she's somebody who doesn't work a lot in Hollywood. I mean, since winning the Oscar, she hasn't made a lot of movies, but she's made the right choices. Being in a movie directed by Jordan Peele, that's the right choice. Joining the Quiet Place franchise, that's the right choice. And being in this animated film is the right choice. Nyong'o is next set to star in the movie Straw Waits with Chloe Grace Moretz. While Nyong'o brings most of the heart to this movie, it's Pedro Pascal who brings the comedy. He plays Fink, a fox who begins the movie as a cynical figure just trying to get by. I was blown away by Pascal in this movie. To play a character that is sometimes the comedic sidekick and other times profound, it's not an easy thing to pull off. For as big as Pedro Pascal is right now, he's starring in two of the biggest recent television shows, The Mandalorian and The Last of Us. There's a real chance he gets even bigger. Here's his upcoming films: Gladiator 2 with Paul Mescal and Denzel Washington, The Fantastic Four: First Steps, playing Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic himself, along with Vanessa Kirby, Joseph Quinn, who is also in Gladiator 2, and Eben Moss Bacharach, The Mandalorian and Grogu with Sigourney Weaver, Eddington with Joaquin Phoenix, Emma Stone, and Austin Butler, and Materialist with Dakota Johnson and Chris Evans. If even two of those movies hits big, it could cement Pedro Pascal as a movie star. His success on television is giving him all of these massive opportunities. I mean, that's a list of big blockbusters and award contending films. He is an actor I really like. One of my favorite Pedro Pascal movies is the movie Triple Frontier with Ben Affleck, Charlie Hunnam, and Garrett Hedlund. Not to mention Oscar Isaac. It's a really good, underrated Netflix movie. The writer-director of The Wild Robot is Chris Sanders. Now, the name Chris Sanders is far from a household name, but he's played a hand on some of the most beloved animated films of all time, getting a story credit on Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. You've heard of those? Co-wrote the screenplay to Mulan, and co-wrote and co-directed Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. And for as good as those films are, he's done his absolute best work as the writer-director on The Wild Robot. It's a simple movie that also happens to be very deep. It's the ultimate movie about being a parent. The big question when it comes to modern-day animated films is this a movie for kids and parents, or is it only for one side? And I believe both parties will enjoy this film. I believe that parents will get something very deep and meaningful out of this movie, and kids will really enjoy the film. There are funny moments in it. What I gathered from watching this movie is that this is a man in Chris Sanders who has really mastered the craft of making an animated movie, and that's what got me so excited about it. After I watched it and looked back at his filmography, I was like, clearly it was building up towards a movie like this. The Wild Wild Robot comes from Dreamworks Animation, which I was a big fan of as a kid. They, of course, made the Shrek movies, but they got to a place where I found their movies to be a bit complacent. They were usually making sequels to their big hits like Madagascar and the Kung Fu Panda films, and visually I thought they were becoming uninteresting. That is until this latest run of movies for them, which include The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, both in 2022. Those two films showed that DreamWorks had evolved stylistically to a point where they are once again competing with Pixar, and now with The Wild Robot, they have made arguably their best movie. It's not just for kids, it's thoughtful while still being a lot of fun. DreamWorks is really helping to elevate animated movies visually and tonally. DreamWorks movies are at their most interesting to me. And I want to focus on the visual aspect of their movies for a minute because I think that's the most important thing when it comes down to animated movies. Yes, I like when famous actors voice funny sidekicks. That's great. But what this movie has going for it the most is the look of it. And I have gotten really back into animated movies over the last few years because of the look of them. I just love the look of the Spider-Verse movies, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Like, animated films are taking chances. They are trying to make themselves look better than ever before. And they also look different than most films. Like, you are not going to find another DreamWorks movie that looks like The Wild Robot. Usually the animated films that hold up for me are the ones that I think look great, like Sleeping Beauty. Like, that is a movie that holds up to me because of the look of that film. And The Wild Robot is going to hold up because of the look. Yes, I think Nyong'o is brilliant. Yes, I think Pedro Pascal is brilliant. But the look of the movie is what does it for me. It's the thing that I loved about Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, was the look of that movie. The different animating styles that film has. It makes you, the audience, believe that anything can happen at any moment during the movie. It makes that imagination come to life, which is what you're going for when it comes to an animated movie. There's all this talk that DreamWorks is going to make a Shrek 5 and that they're going to make a donkey movie, and that's fine. I love those characters. I want to see Mike Myers back. I want to see Eddie Murphy back. I want to see Cameron Diaz back. But what I want more than anything is for them to do something different than what they did in the first 4 Shrek movies. Like, stylistically, do something different. Make it make sense. That's something I loved about Puss in Boots and The Last Wish, is that it did not feel at all related to the first Puss in Boots movie. It felt like its own thing. It was taking chances, and I get it. Maybe you don't want to take those same chances when it comes to a beloved franchise like Shrek. Like, you just want to give the people what they want. But DreamWorks is being rewarded right now for The Wild Robot because it is doing something different that you don't see in most DreamWorks movies. Playing it safe when it comes to animated movies is the death nail, and I think Disney just learned that lesson the hard way when it came to Disney's Wish. They tried to make a movie that featured everything we all love about Disney movies, and they failed epically because nobody wants to see something they've already seen. We go and see movies because we want to see something new and different, and we don't necessarily know what that's going to be, but when we see it, we all know it. The Spider-Verse movies are the perfect example. They took a beloved character in Spider-Man that we all loved, and they did something so different than what we're used to, and we all were in agreement. Oh yeah, this thing rocks. That's the kind of thing I love about animated movies. The Lego Batman movie is another example. We have such a history with that character. I want to see DreamWorks do something like that when it comes to Shrek 5. Like, I really hope that movie works because I really do love what DreamWorks has been doing recently when it comes to their new movies. Box office. So far, The Wild Robot has made over $100 million, and that number should grow due to the positive word of mouth the film is receiving. Oscar chances. As of right now, The Wild Robot is the prohibitive favorite to win Best Animated Feature, and I have a strong feeling that that will hold up. But last year, I believed that Beyond the Spider-Verse was going to win Best Animated Feature, and it lost to The Boy and the Heron. So I've heard some Oscar pundits say that Chris Sanders has a very good chance of getting nominated for Best Adapted adapted screenplay. And that's great and all, but what I really want to happen is for him to get nominated for Best Director. Making an animated movie comes down to who directs the movie, especially when it's a guy with this reputation of making great animated films. And I feel this way about other directors who mainly make animated films. Brad Bird is a guy who should have been nominated for a Best Directing nomination at the Oscars for his work on like Ratatouille or The Incredibles. John Musker and Ron Clements, who made movies like Aladdin. Pete Docter, who directed Inside Out and Soul. And Guillermo del Toro definitely should have gotten an Oscar nomination for his Pinocchio movie. I know it's not gonna happen, but Chris Sanders should be one of the 5 nominees for Best Director at the upcoming Oscars. While watching this movie, The Wild Robot, I was trying to think of comparison points, but the only movie I could really think of was Pixar's WALL-E, another movie about a robot. You also have The Iron Giant, one of my all-time favorites. And as someone who grew up with every Disney animated movie featuring a signature villain, I did like the fact that there was no big villain in this movie. There's no bad guy. There's also no songs. This isn't a musical. I mean, that's one element that we all have gotten used to when it comes to animated movies. Like with the Frozens, the Moanas. We're going to watch this animated movie and there's going to be a hit song, and that song is going to become such a hit that we're going to forget about all the other elements of the movie itself. Like I was saying earlier on in the podcast, I think animation is at a great place right now. Like I think there are real directors trying to make groundbreaking movies like The Wild Robot, like The Boy and the Heron, like the Spider-Verse movies, like Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. But then on the other hand, you have these movies like Garfield, the Minions movies, the Troll movies. They're just basic films. I don't hate those movies. They're not necessarily bad. They just don't move the needle. And maybe that's not the point of them, but I kind of feel like more people would enjoy these movies than those ones. But sadly, those movies are more popular. And we all know at this point they just make the Minions movies to make a lot of money. I think a lot of people would put the Super Mario Brothers film in that list. And I like that movie a lot, but even I would admit that's not a movie that's taking a lot of chances. Like that is a very basic Super Mario Brothers movie. It doesn't have a deep theme. It's just here is Chris Pratt as Mario, here is Jack Black as Bowser. Very basic stuff happening in that movie. And I'm not against it. I'm just rooting harder for movies like The Wild Robot. That's the type of animated movie I want. And here's the thing, they're not making animated movies for me. They're making animated movies for kids. But I believe that a kid should watch a movie with a message like The Wild Robot. I do get it when people are annoyed by movies like this that have deep themes. They're like, oh, this movie thinks it's way smarter than it really is. Like Lightyear is the perfect example of that. Pixar's Lightyear, a prequel movie for Buzz Lightyear or whatever you want to call that. That movie thought it was so thoughtful. Like they clearly thought they were making such a profound movie that we're all going to relate to, and that wasn't the case. Now that's not a bad movie, that's just a misguided movie. Which The Wild Robot is not. It is a movie that works on an emotional level and at a basic fun level. Like your kid is really going to enjoy watching this movie. It has talking animals, it is silly, but it's also really smart and it's not talking down to you. Getting back to the Oscars for a moment, I would absolutely love to see The Wild Robot get a Best Picture nomination, but it's only happened for 3 other animated films ever: Beauty and the Beast, Up, and Toy Story 3. I don't think The Wild Robot will get a Best Picture nomination, but it should. A good test for any movie is, does this movie deserve its ending? And this movie absolutely does. It has a heartfelt ending that is super well earned. As you can tell, this movie has all of the elements I want in an animated movie. Yes, it has good vocal performances from well-known actors, Lupita Nyong'o and Pedro Pascal. It is made by somebody who has a history of making great animated films in Chris Sanders. It's an easy easy watch and a good time, but it also has you thinking about life afterwards. We all like when a movie stays with us for a while, and The Wild Robot has done that for me and many others. So this is an adaptation of a book, but it felt like a much needed adaptation because with a lot of animated films, we all know what happens. They adapt fairy tales. Animated movies have been most associated with fairy tales to varying degrees of success. You know the names: Pinocchio, Peter Pan, Snow White, and then they played on that with Shrek. Like Shrek was a different adaptation of those fairy tales. The Wild Robot is very different and it felt way more modern than those other movies, which I think is something that you should be going for when making a movie in 2024. Make movies that are relatable. I mean, I've been harping on how this movie is about parenthood, but it's also about friendship. When it comes to my favorite animated films of all time, these are movies that I can watch over and over and over again, more so than live action films. Like, I've seen The Lion King more than any other movie. In recent years, I've rewatched Kubo and the Two Strings over and over and over again. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish I've seen a few times. The Bad Guys I've seen a few times. Guess what's going to enter that rotation? The Wild Robot. The minute this movie becomes available to watch, I will watch it over and over and over again. Because it was an easy watch, it's not super plot driven, it's all about the emotional aspects, it's all about the theme of the movie itself. And I cannot overemphasize this enough. The quality of an animated movie for me always comes down to the look of the film. And there is no animated film that I've seen recently that looks as good as The Wild Robot. This is what I want to end this podcast on. I think the best animated films are the ones that are not easily repeatable. I was talking about Shrek. So for as good as Shrek is, and I do believe it's a great animated film, I think that Dreamworks copied that model for Shrek 2, for Shrek 3, and for the fourth Shrek. Like, they copied that model. Oh, Eddie Murphy is just going to be so funny, you are going to love this movie. Mike Myers is going to be so funny, you are going to love this movie. You cannot repeat the model of The Wild Robot. Maybe there will be a sequel, but it will not be easily repeatable. It's like Beyond the Spider-Verse. It's as good as the first Spider-Verse movie, but it's still completely different. Like, they went a different route. Even with those great Disney films of the 90s, like, we all love to lump those movies in with one another, but Aladdin is very different than Hercules and The Lion King. Like, those are three of my favorite movies ever, but they are very different. And Mulan is very different. Like, these movies hold up on their own and they cannot be repeated easily. And that's something I like and admire about them, that you won't be seeing a lot of movies. They might try to copy The Wild Robot, but you will not see a movie like The Wild Robot coming around all the time. And if I'm being honest, I don't really want that. Like I was saying when it comes to DreamWorks earlier, I kind of got tired of their model. I was like, oh, they're doing the same old thing over and over again. I need some real change. I've had that with Pixar. I've had that with Disney, when you're just like, I get what you guys are doing. You're doing it very well, but I want something very different. And maybe this is stupid, but I do want the movies I like to be kind of one of a kind. And I really do believe that The Wild Robot will become that over time. Like, I don't think this will be a movie where you go, oh, these other 5 movies, they just copied the model of The Wild Robot. Because I don't think that's a model you can copy. Like, there's just something. This movie has everything going for it. Lupita Nyong'o has a great voice. Pedro Pascal is brilliant in the film. Chris Sanders has been working on animated films for decades now. And I know there's already been some talks about a sequel because there are sequel books. I would love to see it because I have all the faith in the world that Chris Sanders would do something drastically different than what he did in the first movie. He wouldn't just be like, rinse, repeat, here's the same thing again. I mean, I'm of course going to give it some time, but I do believe this will end up being one of my favorite animated films. The Wild Robot is that good. Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I highly recommend you check out The Wild Robot. Next week on the podcast, I'm talking about another animated film, Inside Out 2, starring Amy Poehler and Maya Hawke. So tune into that and please rate, review, and subscribe.